Welcome, everyone, to Ladder Daily Digest. We try to appreciate creativity and other aspects of learning. And today we have with us Travis. He has created a website called Nutrition, and he is currently studying at Utah State in the nutrition program, and he has an emphasis in meat. And we're going to get to the meat of the issue with Travis right now. But first of all, Travis, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Gene. So I'm a 35-year-old. I come from New York City. I lived there for 10 years, and I moved to Utah 2 years ago to do a master's in nutrition at Utah State University in Logan, Utah. Right after college, in my undergrad back in 2012 or so, my mom recommended a book by Gary Taubes called Good Calories, Bad Calories. I was, just slightly overweight after college. I was like a drinker and, was doing the whole,
Party
college
thing.
routine, party thing, eating lots of cheap, carbs and stuff, and really didn't know anything about nutrition. And so I read this book. I was doing long commutes into New York City from Connecticut, and I had tons of time to read, maybe like 2 to 3 hours a day. So I read this book and I was just like, wow, there is so much information, so much history, so much science I didn't know. And it really blew me away. So I ended up doing a ketogenic diet that summer. Then I was kind of on and off it over the years. It helped me lose some weight and feel a lot better.
So that was about a
And
dozen years
then,
ago, right?
yeah, a dozen years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned at some point to me that when you were young, you had kind of a skeptical attitude about life. How did that happen, you think?
Yeah, so I was raised non-religious, but my mom wanted me to be exposed to religion. So when I was in middle school, like sixth and seventh grade, I went to this focus after school camp. And, like we would play ultimate frisbee and manhunt and stuff. And
No, it's just
then,
generic Christian
yeah, it
or
was like a Protestant Christian
Protestant.
thing. This was in Connecticut. Yeah. And then we would have like a 15, 20-minute Bible study after we ate some pizza. At this point, I wasn't really a believer, but I had recently stopped believing in Santa. And I felt like,
Wait a minute.
I had evidence.
There's
Yeah,
no
yeah, yeah.
Santa?
Like, there's no Santa. Sorry, kids.
Or
Like I
Easter
was the
Bunny or
first.
Tooth Fairy,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
go
I
down
was
the
the
list, right?
first. Yeah, I was the firstborn, so I didn't have like older siblings to kind of let me in on the secret.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I was a dedicated little believer, and I didn't really understand how like the sleigh lands on a slanted roof, or how like Santa gets down the chimney. But I think what I took away from that was that if you have full faith in adults, you can believe anything, and they can get you to
Right.
believe anything.
And
Once I
you were comparing what you were learning in this program with what you were learning in school.
Yeah, yeah. So in middle school, like you start your basic like physics class and chemistry class in sixth and seventh grade. And there, like, you're doing the experiments yourself. You're understanding for the first time how science works. Comparing that to like this after school program. Now, a lot of the other kids, they were much more believers. They had been going to church their whole life, and their parents were like dedicated Christians. So they weren't asking questions. But me, I was coming into it as a skeptic already, and I was comparing it against my science classes, and I was like, how do you know what these things that you say you know? And the pastors were always like, well, you just have to have faith, you just got to believe. And I think at some point I really realized that it was like they wanted me to be gullible and just believe whatever they said. And so I was just not satisfied with that at all. And it really it kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. Like, how could these adults be telling me, 13-year-old kid, what to believe, but they didn't really have any evidence for it. It just
Mm.
felt really wrong to me, and like it still bothers me, now as an adult, like mad, like how could they do that to a kid? Like trying to teach him that hell exists when they have no, reasonable explanation of where it exists or how we go there or how we could evolve to go there even, like and yeah, so when I hit high school when I was 14, my science teacher, it was a biology class, and he mentioned that he was agnostic, and I was like, "Whoa, that I didn't even like know that word existed." So this was in the early days of the internet. Like I think I got cable internet when I was 13. We went from dial up to cable, and I entered the online realm with all the early forums and stuff and was like blown away that there were all these people talking and discussing religion and Christianity and why people believe. So then I got a Dawkins book, The God Delusion, and I kind of like got into the new atheist movement through high school.
Right. So did that inform like where you went to undergrad work?
So my undergrad, in 10th grade in high school, I did a computer science class at Columbia. I traveled into the city for it. And I was kind of like, yeah, computer science is probably like my best shot to make money. But basically, by the time I was like middle through my undergrad in computer science and business, I was like already kind of not loving computer science. It's kind of like a very difficult field where you really have to be like very on your game, I guess. But anyway, I graduated with a computer science business degree, which was kind of like meant
Oh, I
to
see.
be like an auditor for like Price Waterhouse Coopers and other
So
big
you were able to keep sort of enough interest to graduate, but you were losing sort of interest in the field, and you were noticing that maybe it wasn't make suited for you. It wasn't your best fit necessarily. And so,
Yeah, but I felt trapped, like
yeah, you didn't know
after you
what else to
spend like
do.
5 years in it. Yeah, I didn't know what else to do. I was interested in biology and science and religion, but I didn't know how to make sense of those. So I've been reading books and keeping up to date, tons of online discussions. But yeah, then I came across Gary Taubes in 2012 and I realized like, wow, there's like this whole field of nutrition and history, and then there's almost like this huge amount of corruption in the field because these scientists from these companies were bringing in their own ideas to make their competitors seem unhealthy. So, like the processed food companies, the seed oils and the sugar industries were hugely powerful in like the mid 1950s. And they really wanted to, just like the cigarette companies, they wanted to push back and say our products are healthy and good for everyone.
Right. So, for
And
instance, like the oil companies would say, butter is bad for you.
yeah,
Have
yeah,
if you consume our oil, you'll have better health. And
right,
so
right.
that turned out to be erroneous.
It turned out to be erroneous. This woman named Kristen Kearns published an article in 2016 that looked at the Sugar Research Foundation, and they were taking payments from, or they were giving money to Harvard to basically write like a biased review that exonerated sugar and laid the blame on saturated fat. And at the same time, the Procter and Gamble, this was the company that created Crisco in 1912. Their oils are very high in omega-6 polyunsaturated fats. So they also had an incentive to push back on high saturated fat foods such as meat and dairy. So these two kind of conflicts of interest from the sugar and the seed oil industries kind of found the perfect scapegoat, which was saturated fat and cholesterol. And they could basically say, like, look, you have to take these things out of your diet. It's what everyone loves eating, but instead you should eat our sugar and drink our soda and eat our
Or Crisco
processed,
in your
yeah,
pie
Crisco.
shells. Now I
Yeah,
see
and
nothing wrong with that diet. No, I'm just kidding.
yeah, I mean, and they had been, marketing these things for 40 or 50 years, and they had figured out that people wanted this kind of clean, perfect, modern, futuristic food that, left behind like the messy lard and, the butchering and the slaughter and stuff that the old animal fats had been associated with. That whole movement really kind of changed America. And then in the 1960s and 70s, we get like the Ansel Keys and the anti-cholesterol, ideologues. They get all this money from these massive companies, and then it ends up affecting the dietary guidelines of America, and they end up, writing against saturated fat, and they're like, eat lots of grains and and fruits and vegetables and nuts. When you compare that diet to what we would probably evolved on, like, one of my topics of interest, I suppose, is how did humans evolve over like the last 8 million years since we split from chimpanzees? My main theory is that something was pushing down the gas pedal of evolution to make us smarter, but also slimmer and less muscly and stuff. And what that gas pedal that I think is animal fat. So humans were able to hunt large megafauna, and there's a basic rule for large mammals where the larger it is, the more fat calories are in it as like a percentage of the total calories. So if
On one hand, that seems sort of opposite to what you initially might think, because you think, oh, they're going to need more muscle, right, to move their big bodies. But you could also say they need fat to supply the energy for those muscle movements, and so they would
right,
have
and
high
it's
fat.
also like it also gives them more room. Like there's certain seasons of the year when they put on more fat. Like the males have like a rutting season where they're not really interested in eating; they're just fighting other males. They can
And
eventually
bears
mate.
hibernate, so they eat ahead
Yep.
of
Yep,
time.
and bears eat like berries so that they can gain weight, and squirrels eat nuts with a high amount of linoleic acid, which increases their torpor, which leads to fat gain. So all these animals have evolved ways to store fat for the winter, or females are also storing fat so they can have their babies, and
Right. It's
so.
because they're basically eating for two. My wife loves
Mhm.
to say that. No, I'm just kidding.
So there's a paleoanthropologist named Mickey Bendor, and he's been pushing this paleo angle where humans were really hunting these megafauna and eating 70% plus meat diets. So I like to tie that in with the carnivore movement now, where people are eating all beef diets basically, and it's if you omit carbohydrates from your diet and you can only eat 20 to 35% protein, that's how much your body can actually process before like you get ammonia toxicity or something. The balance of your calories have to be from fat or carbohydrates. I think it makes sense that we would have eaten, 80% plus animal foods, and especially during the ice ages in Europe 50,000, 100,000 years ago, we would have been, very dependent on these giant mammoths and mammals and stuff that are high in fat. We have evidence of cut marks from 3.1 million years ago. So you can
On
tell that
bones of large animals.
yeah, yeah, a human was or a human ancestor was slicing these bones and with rocks, and they do analysis and they compare it against other carnivores in the area, and they're making sure it's not some hyena chewing on a
Beef
bone.
marks, right?
Yeah, and so there's a good amount of evidence that says like, okay, like this gas pedal of animal fat was being eaten by humans. we were becoming bipedal. We're less dependent on fermenting plants in our colon for energy, which is how chimpanzees and gorillas get a lot of their energy. More so gorillas. Chimpanzees are more of a fruit eater.
So the diet
But
might have fueled growth in like our brains, and
yep.
which led to cognitive abilities increasing and stuff like that.
Yeah, and then you become a better hunter, you're a better tracker, you have better social cohesion, you can plan together a hunt better.
Start communities,
and,
bigger communities.
Yep, and then you can also have like a longer lifespan. So like your most expert hunters in the tribe would really be like grandfathers in their 60s, where they've really mastered like the full understanding of the comings and goings of the animals in the area and when to hunt and how to track. But this also means our guts shrink in volume. So we have a fairly long, shortened or small intestine and a small colon. So, and a very strong stomach pH, like a very acidic stomach on the level of scavengers and carnivores. So some of those adaptations might indicate that humans kind of adapted to this mostly meat diet. But a key part of Mickey Bendor's theory is that, like the megafauna ended up dying out. Either we hunted them to extinction or there was climatic change, the younger Dryas impact. There's multiple theories on why that happened. But
and that might have led to domesticating cattle and growing their own meat supply.
Exactly. We would have had to hunt like smaller animals, and that meant we had to make better hunting
Weapons.
technology, like bows and arrows and stuff. Before you could kind of like a large megafauna, like a mammoth or something, they don't really run away. They just kind of like turn in.
You could surround it with a whole bunch of people with clubs.
Exactly. You could push them over like a cliff or something, or you could dig a hole,
guide them to an area, right?
Yeah, imagine heads smashed in or something. Like they would push hundreds of these bison over a cliff, and then they would process the bison down into pemmican, which was a 50% fat, 50% protein, kind of like one of the first processed foods. And they would make these big sacks of them in the hide, and then they could eat it all year. So all the animal life in America, probably supported 20 million Native Americans before, Europeans came and then said, "Oh, this is our land, manifest destiny," and stuff. And again, that comes down to religion, right? Like they have the right to do it because of God. And
and so something happened to you 5 years ago, say, that started, you changed your careers, right? You started thinking, I want to study this. And what led you to Utah State?
Yeah, so in 2017, I was a moderator on this Reddit called Keto Science, and now I have about 50 subreddits. You can see them all if you go to Keto 4. But I came across this guy named Sean Baker. He's a doctor and orthopedic surgeon who had just started an all meat carnivore diet. And I was like, wow, this is really exciting. It's kind of like a new take on the ketogenic diet where you don't necessarily need to eat the broccoli and the salads. And at this point, I've been doing keto on and off for like 6 or 7 years. So I was like, that's I was skeptical at first. I thought it was kind of crazy, like, oh, I don't need fiber, I don't need these fruits and vegetable nutrients and stuff.
All the stuff
I looked into it
in grade school and high school with
what
did you learn? I don't remember if I learned the pyramid or 4 basic food groups or
what the pyramid was invented. Yeah, the pyramid was invented in 92, so you probably wouldn't have
so my kids then got the pyramid. That's what.
Yep. And
what do they teach nowadays in high school or
nowadays they teach My Plate, which is like a dietetics thing. So it's like 1/4 grains, 1/4 protein, which could be, you know, like beans or meat,
Right.
1/4 dairy, and 1/4 fruits and vegetables, and then like a water or something on the side. I'm very much against the dietary guidelines because they teach that my plate thing, but they also have these things called accepted macronutrient distribution ranges,
Hmm.
AMDRs, and they set like the amount of carbohydrates as a percentage of your total calories between 45 and 65%. But the reason they set that is they looked at the average amount that the population was eating, and they're like, "Oh, this is a good amount for
It's kept everybody
anyone."
alive so far, right? Why
Yeah,
not
so
just keep
far,
doing it?
right? But one thing that's interesting is they increased the omega-6 polyunsaturated fat guidelines to be higher than the evolutionary amount.
Hmm.
So there's this thing called the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, and some of the early scientists back 20, 30 years ago at the NIH basically figured out that it was likely to be 4 to 1 or lower, like 1 to 1. And whether you were like a carnivore or you were like early agrarian farmer or something, you wouldn't have been able to get that many omega-6s in your diet. So the ratio would have been pretty low, between 4 and 1 and 1 to 1. Now the dietary guidelines recommend a 5.6 to 1 ratio, and they recommend you eat 5 to 10% at least of your calories as this omega-6 polyunsaturated fat. And
Where do we
if
get omega-6s mostly in the diet?
mostly from seed oils like soybean oil and corn oil. So a good way to understand it, I
Back to
read
the
this professor.
oils again.
Well, yeah, they're very important. So they've basically been the major increase in our diets over the last 100 years. So like red meat has fallen, chicken has increased, and seed oils have increased, but even sugar hasn't really gone up that much. So the question is like, how have our diets changed, and why are we getting so much chronic disease now? And my main idea, I think, is that these seed oils have increased in frequency way beyond the evolutionary level and have led to all these diseases. But because the original guidelines and these, you know, Procter and Gamble company and the AHA and stuff, they've all been basically telling us for 60 years that seed oils are actually really healthy for us. So now there's like a multitude of science, and if you look in the science, you'll find meta-analyses and science that says seed oils are actually really healthy for you. So it's become really confusing where can you really trust that science, or do you have to be skeptical of it? And there's mechanistic studies that have basically said the opposite, and that we should actually start limiting our linoleic acid. Linoleic acid is the main omega-6 fatty acid in plant oils. And a good rule of thumb, how to understand this stuff, is chlorophyll, the green pigment in leaves, that has a high amount of alpha linolenic acid, which is the omega-3 fatty acid. It's an 18 chain saturated or polyunsaturated fat with 3 double bonds. And that fat gets elongated into DHA and EPA, which are really like the essential fatty acids that we need in our diet. Our body converts a little bit of it, but we should also get some kind of from like wild fish or grass-fed meat. But there's even some in grain-fed meat and stuff. But if you look, but the seeds in plants mostly hold the omega-6 variety of fat. So if you end up grinding and processing, you know, like a million seeds of corn or soy, you're going to get a very high amount of omega-6 out of it and a very low amount of omega-3, which ends up raising your omega-6 to omega-3 ratio to like 20 to 1 or 50 to 1.
Wow,
So,
even
so
higher
a
than
lot
the
of times
guideline.
we, yeah, and a lot of times we hear that saturated fat is bad, but it doesn't make a lot of sense mechanistically because saturated fat is not very prone to oxidation. The important thing to understand is the polyunsaturated fats have these double bonds that can the like oxygen and heat can come in and disturb the double bond, which is weaker than like a single bond, and it can mutate this polyunsaturated fat into these other species of fats that are end up being inflammatory. They lead to these chemicals called 4-HNE, which is called a 4-hydroxy nonenal. And if you
I
look
just
that,
started thinking, Travis, that while this is interesting to me, it's kind of more like a science lecture instead of like an informational, like a average Joe kind of a thing can understand. Let's maybe go back into the sort of how you got to Utah State in particular. And,
okay,
you know, we can do the advanced nutritional lecture course on some of their episode. But anyhow,
go
so
ahead. Yeah, yeah.
what exactly attracted you to Utah State in particular?
So I was a big Twitter user, and one of the guys I followed is named Dr. Stefan Van Vliet, and he posted a job offer. He was leaving his position at Duke, and he was starting a new lab in Utah. And at the time, it was kind of like the end of COVID, and my wife and I were living in Brooklyn for many years, renting. We're like, all right, we're ready to have a family, but where do we move? Do we go to Connecticut or California? And do we spend like $1 million for a house or something? So Stefan posted this query, and I was like, at first I retweeted it for my followers, and then I was like, maybe I should apply. So I sent him a message, and we had a Zoom call, and we had all the same interests on the call and all the same complaints about like other people on Twitter and the whole idea. So and I really liked a lot of his papers. He comes at it more from like a farming angle, like a grass fed or a bison kind of angle, and then like an
So,
agroecological angle. Not so much like a ketogenic diet, which
so what type of job was it?
he was looking for PhD students, but I was like, well, I maybe I can do that, but maybe I could at least do a master's and then we can see what happens. I ended up moving here to Utah in 2021 and starting a master's program. Yeah, I had never really thought about moving to Utah before.
It's
I
like
stayed at
a research job.
Alta. Yeah. So I'm a graduate
Okay.
assistant for 2 years, and I'm actually just finishing my thesis right now. That's why I know so much
So
about those fatty
you're
acids.
you're working and going to school at the same time. I mean, did you get the job?
Yeah, I mean, but I'm like a graduate assistant, so I was getting paid like a stipend, not very
Mm-hmm.
much money, but
Okay.
my tuition was totally comped.
Okay. And so what types of jobs are you looking for after you complete? Are you research jobs or
Yeah, like I'm
consulting
really
industries or what?
I want to keep like going through the nutrition science. I eventually maybe want to write a book on the carnivore history. So I have a website called nutrition.com, and I put in 1,000 entries. I read all these old books. I have like
Sure.
200 books around
I mean, if you think
me.
about it, you know, universities say buy these books, and then somebody will tell you what you're reading while you're reading these books. But you can read all the books on your own and have almost as good an education as paying tens of thousands of dollars to some institution. But it's just not
Yeah.
recognized. It's just called an informal education. And so,
Hmm.
so I was thinking maybe you can just quickly outline what's the difference between the diets that you've mentioned, like carnivore or the other diets that are around that the keto, as far as like food types of foods that are in each one. And then we'll
Yeah.
talk
So
after that
keto.
about what benefits to each one, or maybe while you're talking about each one, you can say what benefits that you might see from it.
Sure. So ketogenic diets really just mean that you're limiting your carbohydrate intake down to 20 grams or less a day. Sometimes it's as high as 50, but that's really just like a guideline. You could go as low as 0.
So fats and
Does it?
proteins become the biggest part of it.
Right, but it's generally agnostic as to whether you're getting those calories from meat or plants. So
Okay.
you could have avocados, you could have eggs, you could have meat and fish, but there's some people that do vegan ketogenic diets.
Hmm.
They have an alpha gal allergy to red meat, or they're just in it for an ethical thing. So some people do vegan keto diets and they're eating, coconut oil and more plant oils and fats, and then they're not eating rice or bread or even really beans because they're all too high in carbs. Technically, that's kind of a difficult diet to do. You can also do like a low carb diet, which might have 100 grams of carbs a day, but compared to our normal diets, they have 300 to 400 grams of carbs, which equals out to like 1,200 calories. If you multiply by 4. Ketogenic diets, you can also have like a higher ratio of fat to protein. So you could have like 90% fat to 10% protein, and then anywhere between there and like 70% fat, 30% protein.
And
As you lower,
are there two main other things, like the carnivore versus the caveman diet? Is there another diet
I
that's like that?
mean, paleo basically means don't eat any processed or industrial foods that might have come out in like the last 10,000 years. So it limits
So
dairy.
you try to transport yourself back 10,000 years ago and eat whatever was there.
It's not so much low carb, so might have 30 to 40% carbs, but the paleo, they would have had like a pretty good omega-6 to omega-3 balance, so there wouldn't have been any seed oils.
So
So
are there some paleo diets that eliminate seed oils and some that include them? I mean, I guess there's different theories.
no, most paleo diets, like, because seed oils, really only came out 200 years ago.
Okay. Like you get
They're
some from seeds, but not a seed
some from
oil
seeds, yeah.
product. Right.
Yeah, I mean, you need thousands of seeds to equal like a tablespoon of oil, or like maybe like a quart of it or whatever.
And then carnivore is just
Just as it sounds, it's
animal
just meat.
proteins.
Yep. Yep. And lots of influencers have made different types. Like Michaela Peterson made one called the Lion Diet, which is really just ruminant meat like beef and lamb and salt and water. Other carnivores include bacon and eggs. So I actually did a study through Harvard. I helped design the questions, and we queried 2,029 people on how they defined the carnivore diet. And I think 85% of the meals were red meat, which wasn't pork. So that's like beef or lamb. And some people eat eggs. They might have fish once or twice a week. Chicken and pork end up kind of being discouraged. So people end up being like, oh, I don't really want to eat. I feel bad after eating them. So I hear this anecdote all the time, and we're like, all right, well, if you don't want to
Let's
eat them,
study it.
like, get them out. Yeah, but one of the big things in our diets is that chicken and pork has increased over like the last 100 years, and those animals are monogastric, so they have one stomach, and that means when they eat high omega-6 fatty acid foods, they don't have microbes that can convert it into less harmful fats. So it ends up being that all the fat in their body has this high omega-6 amount of fat from the seeds that they're eating from the corn and the soy. I generally don't think that chicken and pork are that good for us. And a lot of the chicken we eat ends up being fried in seed oils again. So you're introducing
Get a
heat,
double
and
dose.
yeah, and it's breaking apart that fat and making it toxic, basically. And yeah, so I think if you basically eat less chicken and eat more beef, whether it's grass-fed or grain-fed, you'll end up being a lot healthier. These diets seem to be able to fix all sorts of diseases that basically no one knows how they originally get caused. So autoimmune diseases, skin issues, digestive issues like IBS, IBD, ulcerative colitis, and Crohn's disease. There's lots of great anecdotes online about people, trying all carnivore diets to go into remission from those things. Then you've got like your typical type 2 diabetes. So my history database back in 1797, a doctor started suggesting a carnivore diet to reverse diabetes. And since then
Wow.
we've had, yeah, so since then we've had other doctors copy him, and they would send pamphlets and medical journals back to him, and they collected like a whole case series in the early 1800s. So the carnivore diet has been around for a much longer time. I wouldn't call it a fad. And because it might have even been our diet for a few million years, it's
Right.
really inappropriate to call it a fad.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing. It's like more of a rediscovery, right, than a fad in a way. That's what you're
Yeah,
thinking.
yeah. And it kind of bubbles up in popularity every now and again. The Atkins diet is kind of like a version of carnivore. He ended up adding more carbs and plants into it to make it more acceptable, but really at the base of it, it's a carnivore diet. I have a lot of books down here about the Inuit, the Eskimos who lived up north of us, and they would have eaten a very carnivorous diet with very few plants. There's like they're above the tree line. There's not even trees that grow up there. So
Right.
they were eating,
Seals and polar
seals and
bears.
whales and polar bears
Whales.
and fish and caribou. So I have like 20 books where, these white explorers would go up and live with the Inuit, and they couldn't bring enough food to survive on their, customary diets. So they'd end up living off the land like the Inuit. And they were all like, wow, like I actually feel really good on these carnivore diets. So that gives me a lot of confidence that it's possible for anyone.
Yeah. So let's see. So we mentioned that you had the Meatrition website, right?
Yep.
We'll provide a link to that. And
Okay.
overall, you're basically the plea maybe here is to have people think about alternatives to their customary diet. If they're experiencing some problems, maybe they could sort of expand their horizons, think about looking at alternative diets and seeing what works for them. And you're studying meat. I remember you talking about some of the research. What was the research project that you're working on now for your thesis?
Yeah, so my thesis about we collected 320 ribeye samples from 100 plus farms around the country and Canada. And we're doing mineral analysis and fatty acid analysis on those samples. And I've been using this new metric called omega balance, which is the total omega-3 divided by the total omega-3 plus omega-6. And like 100 would mean it's like 100% omega-3, and a 50 is like a 1-to-1 ratio, and then like 0 is like it's all omega-6. So your seed oils are around like under 5 omega balance, and our average for grass-fed meat right now is a 38, and grain-fed meat is like a 14. So, and then your pork and your chicken is going to be under 10. The idea is if you match your evolutionary amount, it would be around like a 20 to a 40. You want to kind of cut out your seed oils and your plants to provide those high amounts of omega-6. And then grass-fed meat is going to have like a higher omega balance and be healthier for you. But the grain-fed meat is still like a 14, which is generally higher than most other meats and most other plant. Like, I don't know really if grain-fed meat is bad for you. I think it's generally a lot better than almost everything else. But if you have like an autoimmune disease, it could be caused by this omega-6 to omega-3 imbalance. So maybe grass-fed meat would be a little better for you to heal a little faster.
So you think it might be more the omega-6 to omega-3 balance than the carbs that are taken in? Because I know a lot of carbs are associated with inflammation. But what's the difference between the carb and inflammation sort of connection and the omega-6 to omega-3? What does that do? Is that inflammatory as well, or is there some other process going?
Yeah, I mean, like you need carbohydrates to get cavities and tooth decay and stuff. Generally, I used to be a very anti-carb, and now I'm kind of thinking as more seed oils as a problem. But the interesting thing is if you get into the ketogenic state, your liver is making these molecules called ketones, and they're very anti-inflammatory. And they also provide, and they provide an alternate energy source for your brain, which has kind of been dependent on glucose your whole life. And the mitochondria in those cells can't really burn the glucose that well anymore. So the ketones are kind of helping restore your mitochondria, and there's all these signaling pathways that are, way scientific and stuff. But if you go on the subreddit Keto Science, you can see how all these ketones, affect health. So I think it also helps you get into this fat burning mode. You have more energy, you have higher satiety. You don't get the carb cravings. One big problem is you eat carbs and then like your blood sugar goes way high and then it crashes down low and you get those crazy hunger pangs. But the other thing is the seed oils have these endocannabinoids that make you hungry as well. So I kind of think that together the carbs, the sugar, the fructose combined with the seed oils is really leading to a lot of our chronic diseases. And whether you do keto, whether you do low carb, whether you just cut out your seed oils, I'm really honestly not sure which one is best. But maybe long term.
Does the carnivore diet also put you in a ketosis state?
Yeah, because you're not eating any carbohydrates. There's like 1 gram of carbs in eggs and shellfish, like per serving. So, and you're not eating honey, you're not eating sugar. So you're gonna end up in ketosis on a carnivore diet. And you'll be in a higher amount of ketosis if you have a higher fat to protein ratio. So they're like almost pure fat and then like a little bit of protein.
So where do we get our best fats from in our diets?
Your best fats are going to be
like, should I be eating a stick of butter every day?
Yeah, you could. Yeah. And then like the very fatty beef. No, I also understand that a lot of people don't like the taste of grass-fed. So it's kind of, I'm not going to tell you, and it's also way more expensive. So a lot of people kind of come on. I run a bunch of Facebook groups on carnivore and people are like, oh, do I really need to spend like $20 a pound on all this super expensive meat? And we're like, no, like just get your Costco ground meat or whatever's cheapest. You can get like the 27% tubes of meat, like the 5-pound things that are like $10, and just eat that for a week.
So even though you cook it, it rends a lot of the fat. If you eat the 73% meat in a burger, there's going to be more fat remaining in the burger than if you use 90%.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, definitely. Yeah. You're not going to render it all out.
But you don't recommend like saving the grease and just like drinking it as part of your diet?
Yeah, you can. I sometimes will pour it on top of the burger. Could you use the
beef fat to cook other things? Or I guess you could put it in soups.
Yeah. I mean, slow cooker is a great option. So you can, put a brisket or a corned beef or all sorts of cuts that are good in a slow cooker. And then that, that soup, that fat at the top is going to be all that beef fat. Yeah. I mean,
I know that the chefs all say fat is flavor, but you're saying like fat is a healthier
energy.
lifestyle.
Fat is energy. Yeah. Fat is your replacement of carbohydrates.
Yeah. So we all grew up thinking that fat was bad for you. And now the
Animal
research is
fat.
showing, right, and
Yeah.
in particular animal fat compared to these seed oils. And now
Right.
the studies are showing that the seed oils were promoted studies where they had an agenda. And so looking into sort of a, but it's really hard to have a non-biased state, but hopefully we're getting closer to unbiased research and things like that. And so
Hopefully. I mean, like if you go on the internet and you look up or you look up these topics on X or Reddit and stuff. I mean, it's very contentious, and like the consensus is gonna say seed oils are fine. There's no problem with them, and there is science that basically says that. You know, it when I think about it from an evolutionary point, like we would have evolved on very low linoleic, very low omega-6 diets. And it just doesn't make sense to, throw that away and say, let's eat high omega-6.
and
And
I've heard actually lots of people saying that we are not smarter than the humans 80,000 years ago. We just, in other words, our cognitive abilities, our functions, brain functions are about the same. We just recently just have bodies of work that we're able to store knowledge and then add onto it. And that's helped us, get to the moon, have satellites and cell phones and cars and things, but we're not smarter necessarily cognitively than 80,000 years ago. So it's not our modern diet that's making us smarter or anything. It's just the accumulation of knowledge that we're just building upon. So maybe if we go back to the other diet, you were talking about how the brain receives nutrition better with ketones, right? And with what was the compared to glucose?
Glucose, yeah.
Yeah. And so maybe we can even get better. In other words, that stuff might be slowing us down, even though
totally.
We have all this body of knowledge that we're running on. There's still brain fog. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean,
there's still a higher peak we can go to, a higher level.
yeah, absolutely. I like if you read the anecdotes and the science, the ketogenic diet is now being used to reverse mental health issues. So, like they always say it's a biochemical imbalance. Well, if you eat a bad diet, it's going to cause a biochemical imbalance. And if you eat like a ketogenic diet, these ketones are going to rescue like your suffering mitochondria in your brain. So we've now there's this new field called nutritional psychiatry, and it's basically using a ketogenic diet to reverse bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, brain fog. So, like the list of diseases that could possibly be fixed by a ketogenic diet is like so long. A lot of these diseases, no one knows like really why they happen. The psychiatry field is all they try 10 different drugs and in different amounts, and they don't really know which one is going to help you or hurt you. And then they have to prescribe other drugs to deal with the side effects. A lot of this is like, let's get off the backs of pharmaceutical companies. They're only introducing more problems. And they want you to be dependent on 13 different drugs by the time you're 65. My angle is like I want you to eat a healthier diet, whether it's less seed oils or less sugar or ketogenic or carnivore. I'm not dogmatic. It's up to you. Like at the end of the day, if you prefer having your feet chopped off from diabetic neuropathy in your 50s, like that's your choice. But like you're gonna make the economy suffer. You're gonna increase our healthcare costs. You're just gonna be a pawn for the pharmaceutical companies. Really, like no one really cares about you. Like doctors don't really care that much. They don't have enough time. They don't know all the science and nutrition. They've been basically their whole careers have been funded by the pharmaceutical industry to
And
deal drugs.
So even though we have these new nutritional information coming out, there still could be, and it's sort of like the tendency of capitalist society to promote products that, benefit the bottom line somewhere in somebody's line,
Yeah.
somebody's pockets.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful about when some company and product might say research-based, right? Or the studies are showing that this product is good for you. You might want to check out the funding, who's funding it, who's funding the research, what the
and even
biases
that,
are.
like a lot of our science is based on industry funding, so we have to accept it. Like we might have to take money from grassroots farmers to, do these
Yeah, so
studies. And
it's adding, but you're almost saying if you can think about the philosophy of historically what helped us humans advance millions of years ago and separate ourselves from the other species.
Yeah,
That
it's gonna
that
help clear your
philosophical
bias
basis is there. That'll help
out.
you in your research for what products and who's touting which product to do,
Right.
or dietary guidelines or whatever. And so,
Right.
so that sounds like a good place to end for me right now. We all need to be vigilant. I started to, when I was thinking about talking to you, of calling it the meat of the issue, but I didn't know how much fat was taking part of it. So maybe we'll have to say chewing the fat with Travis as the title.
Yeah, there you go.
Maybe I'll say the meat of the
Rendering
issue,
the fat,
or
yeah.
chewing the fat, or something like that.
Yeah.
So thanks very much, Travis, for visiting with us today. We'll try to, I'm going to try to do my own research and use some of the things now that you're my connection, get some readings from you and try to go on some sort of ketosis based diet.
Great.
Carnivore diet, sounds pretty good to me. I like burgers, but then I need to eat a burger without so much, not the big bun, right? I need to
So
without the bun.
you just use a fork instead, and in your pan you toss some butter in, you form some patties up. You could add some spices if you want, some salt, little paprika or garlic or whatever, but they're not necessary. And you could also add some hot sauce, but again, it's not necessary.
But
But
I don't
you're
need
not
to
going to be
have the
smearing
bun.
mayo on it. Yeah,
Don't
and
spread
no
mayo.
ketchup. I mean,
My
ketchup
wife's not
is
gonna
the first
like that one.
ingredient in most ketchup is high fructose corn syrup, and the first
There you go.
ingredient in mayonnaise is soybean oil. So, and people like eat cups of that stuff now, and it's like, why are we having an obesity crisis? Why is everyone getting cancer? It's like, well, like we weren't eating cups of mayo like a million years ago.
So you're saying
We
the
were,
secret sauce might be no sauce at all?
yeah.
Yeah.
Get those fried foods out of your life, and the carbohydrates. If you do end up omitting them, your carb cravings are going to be gone in 2 weeks, and you can eat 1 to 2 meals a day of mostly beef and dairy,
Yeah. So
and you're gonna
we'll
amazing.
include some links to some of the writings. We'll include links to I suppose nutrition has a lot of the information that people would need to do some research and reading up. There's a difference between reading and researching, right? So I have to be careful. People say, "Oh, I've done all my own research on COVID." It's like, no, you read studies. Your own research would be you would have patients coming in and you would sample their blood. That's what research is. But reading, keeping up on the readings is good.
Yeah, and my website, I was kind of frustrated. I posting the Reddit and other places. So I ended up making this Wix website, and I have 12 or 20 databases in there. And I have a history database, a science, like a reasons we might be carnivores database, and they're all linked together. I have 231 book recommendations in there. So if you,
So you're saying it might not be the prettiest website, but it's going to have a lot of information on it.
Right. It's kind of it's not the nicest looking website, but I stuff more content in there than anywhere else.
Okay.
I'm constantly looking for new books that have just come out, and I follow every major doctor on Twitter. I run 50 different subreddits on seed oils and sugar and keto and carnivore. I'm a moderator on World Carnivore Tribe, which is this shirt right here. So,
There you go.
and I'm trying to get a job after this thesis on some kind of carnivore health like website. I'm as much as 90% of Americans these days are metabolically sick. Every one of those people are either they're destined for a ton of drugs in their life. They're going to take statins and Ozempic and all these new drugs, or they're going to realize, like, I should try one of these diets. I should see if it works for me. They can do it for 30 days or 90 days or a year. They can go back to their old diets. It's not dogmatic. I'm not telling you to be a vegan for the rest of your life. I want you to question, what you've been taught. Really think about, like, the moneyed interest behind, all these things. Like, you can create science and make it into marketing, right? So you can say
Yeah.
your product is healthy and
So
then kind of make.
I have a
Yeah.
condition called ankylosing spondylitis, where I tell people I have arthritis in my spine, and it causes me to look really stiff on these shows. And this is as much as movement I can go side to side, and I can't look like it. When somebody says, "Oh, look, a shooting star," I have to take their word for it. It's really hard for me to look up in the sky anymore. So if I don't think it can be reversed if I change my diet.
Be.
So you're thinking it can be. So
I know quite a few people who have that condition, and carnivore has helped them tremendously.
well,
And
definitely if I go on the carnivore and reduce this, and maybe I start playing basketball again, because that's one thing I couldn't like do a layup very well because I couldn't see the rim. And so if that actually works for me, then you may have saved the quality of my life for the next 15 or 20 years, however long I last. I don't know. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll put you on the Warriors, okay?
Yeah. A lot of people say Steph Curry stole my style of basketball. Somehow his dad, when he'd come to visit and play the Warriors, he might have seen me in a pickup game and taught his son how to do that. But that's a urban legend, I think. But anyhow, yeah.
Well,
so thanks for everything. I will be the guinea pig. If I feel better 3 or 6 months from now, I'll call you. And if I feel worse, I'll send you a bill. No, I'm just kidding.
yeah,
we'll have another show. We'll have an updated show.
Right? Yeah.
Praise the Lord.
Yeah.
There you go. All right. Thanks everybody for watching. Hopefully, you can like, subscribe, and sharing is important. And anybody leave comments, on the bottom if you have any other research you want to share or questions about things. We'll check those things out. All right, everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye.